Hello, this is Mr. Huff, and I want to quickly go over why standard deviations are important when you look at normal distributions. And a normal distribution, a good indicator that you have a normal distribution is when your mean and your mode and your median are almost the same number. So there's three things I want to talk about here, and it has to do with probability of what your measurement values will be. Let's say that we have a part and we measured 1,000 of them. And because it's a manufacturing system, we're going to see variation both above and below the target limit. So let's look at this next slide. So if you look at this middle part right here, this line in the middle, this represents the mean of the data, so the average of the data. And then the plus or minus 1, 2, and 3, this is plus or minus 1 standard deviation, plus or minus 2 standard deviations, and plus or minus 3 standard deviations. So the number in the middle, if you look at these two zones here, so the mean plus or minus 1 standard deviation, 68% of the numbers that you have are going to fit in between these two values, from plus or minus 1, between plus or minus 1 standard deviation of the mean. So if you had 1,000 measurements, there would be 680 measurements in that area there. When you expand that to plus or minus 2 standard deviations, that will encompass 95% of your data. So if you have 1,000 measurements, 950 of them will occur between plus or minus 2 standard deviations. And if you have plus or minus 3 standard deviations, 99.7% of the measurements will fit between those two values. So if you have 1,000 measurements, only 3 of them aren't represented in this data set. Those 3 would be considered outliers for sure. In industry, there is a quality push called Six Sigma, and this is what they're talking about, plus or minus 3 standard deviations, and that all of your material fits in that. And it has to do with making less than 1 mistake per million parts you produce. But that's just an overview of the percentages for a bell curve. Let's review that one more time. So plus or minus 1 standard deviation, you will have 68% of your data will be there. Plus or minus 2, you have 95%. And plus or minus 3, you have 99.7% of your data stored in that range.